So it wasn't this Christmas, and I kind of forget what Christmas it was. It's like 2 or 3 Christmases ago. It was Christmas Eve, and Christmas Eve is packed. And I'm standing in back, ready to process in, and this young man shows up carrying luggage, like he's wheeling his luggage. Little odd for Mass. So he said, "What's going on?" And he says, "Oh, I just got off the plane and I took a taxi here and I'm going to surprise my parents for Christmas. And I know they're at this Mass." So he said, "Well, if you want, I'll help find them for you." And he said, "This way we can kind of play with it a little." So I got up and I said, "Oh yeah, it's, and I forget who it was, but it's, I don't know, Eva and Jerry here," and they stood up, and they were standing up halfway down the aisle, and their son came up walking behind him, and I said, "Yes, your Christmas present is standing behind you." And it was so nice because they turn around and they're just bubbling with joy, and they grab him and hug him and kiss him. Made for a great Christmas for me, just watching. But I like the image of that, just because what we celebrate in the Feast of the Holy Family is really Christ came so that we can find our way to one another, that what we become is one great family. And so I like the kind of surprise that they discovered, their family here. And on the Feast of the Holy Family, there's this kind of theme that's going on with Christmas, of finding Christ. In the first place, Christmas Eve and Christmas Masses, we celebrate that you can find Christ in the humble places. That's what, the manger means. Only the humble show up. And Bethlehem, it would have been a nothing town. Bethlehem would have been like the smallest town in Israel. It would have had like 10 to 12 people in it, or so 10 to 12 families. And, among the humble, you can find the presence of Christ. So that's Christmas. And then the next one is finding Christ in the Holy Family, is where you can find the presence of Christ in people who love each other. You can find the presence of Christ in your own families. And so you have this kind of theme of finding the presence of Christ. And for me, I just got irritated this year because on Thanksgiving, or actually a couple days before Thanksgiving, they're already starting the Christmas sales. And it showed in the news these people camping out in front of Best Buy to get the best possible buy. And come on, these people have more than enough. You could not celebrate Thanksgiving with your family just to save a couple bucks on electronics. I think their priorities, they missed the whole meaning of celebration. And we're hoping on the Feast of the Holy Family that we don't. We find the presence of Christ in our family. And so you have this idea of looking for the presence of Christ, but also this odd theme about losing something as well. In the gospel, you get this strange reading about Christ when he was 12. They go to Jerusalem. And they go to Jerusalem because in Judaism, 3 times a year, you would have to come and, quote unquote, it's in the book of Leviticus, present yourself before the face of God. And one of those is Passover. And so, thousands and thousands would be on their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And Mary and Joseph just think that Jesus is with the relatives. And they discover he's not there. And this is, to me, the amazing part. Could you imagine losing your child for 3 days? I don't think they would have slept. You have a daughter. If you lost your child for 3 days, you wouldn't sleep at night. I feel sorry for Mary and Joseph. And then I'm a little irritated with Jesus when they find him and he says, "Well, don't you know we'd be about my Father's business?" It's making a theological statement, but it sounds kind of like a smart alecky response. But the point being is that where you're going to find Christ is in the house of God. And where we find each other is in the house of God. But, there is something about losing yourself when you have a child. There's this great poem that this woman wrote when she became a mother, where she said, "The most dangerous choice you'll make in your life is to have a child." Because, and this is a line from the poem, which says, after that, your heart will be walking around, and you'll want to always protect it. Anything happens to your child, you're completely vulnerable. And she makes this great point that the moment you choose to love anyone, marriage, or to love a child, your heart is on the outside. You're very vulnerable. And she has this need, after having a child, to protect every child. And I like that because with the theme of the Holy Family, if we do recognize each other as brothers and sisters, just the same way, like this mother, the moment she has a child, her circle of protection grows wider and wider and wider. Now, she wants to protect all children, not just her own. Or my sister said the same thing. She said, my sister, who I love my sister, she's very much different than I am, but, that's all right. Kinda. But, she's an extremely liberal person. I joke that she should be living in Berkeley. But I think this is kind of funny. So she becomes a mother, and she loves being a mother. She really loves being a grandmother. That's even better. But she said, the moment she had her first child, she said, suddenly I became a lot more conservative. I want to protect everybody. And now that she's a grandmother, really, she does want to protect all children. Even though they're not hers, they are hers. That's the theme of the Holy Family. It's this, we want all humanity to be one family. And that's not our wish, that's actually the great desire of God. If you look in the Old Testament, one of the things God is always looking for is a family. And the prophecies, one of the prophecies about the Messiah is that when the Messiah comes, humanity will live in unity. That we will find our way to one another and become brothers and sisters. That's actually the point of the Feast of the Holy Family. Now, what does kind of drive me up the wall about this feast is, I just know it happens every year. I'll get calls from friends next week saying, I went to Mass at so-and-so's place, and the priest said, this is how you should raise your children. And it's never good advice. But let me guarantee you, you do not want to take advice on how to raise children from a celibate. Just ignore it. Now, I have to admit, I'm a huge fan of what's called attachment theory because there's a lot of science behind it. And that is how you raise your children, scientifically proves, makes a huge difference in their adulthood. But the joke is this, and it's kind of this cruel joke. You don't give your child their personality. For whatever reason, it comes from God. What you can give your child, in this attachment theory, is their values. But their personalities, they come from God. Look at me. I'm normal. My sister, not so much. But one day she'll come around. But like in a family, because, everybody's different in a family. You learn to love them despite their differences. Same thing with the Feast of the Holy Family. Is that what we're praying is that we discover Christ here in the house of God, in each other. That we view each other as brothers and sisters. So it's not advice about how to run your personal family. It's just the theme has a little to do with your family, but it's how all of us belong to one family. With God taking on human flesh, we can find our way to one another. That's what it celebrates. It's like, as I said, the parents who are surprised to find their own child standing right behind them. In the house of God, we pray with the feast of Christmas, the incarnation, that God will change us so that when we look at each other, we find our way to one another, that we become one family. And so together, let us stand.